So we're going to do this episode in two parts. The first part, do we have a name for the sequence?
I haven't come up with one
I
yet.
fucking hate it. I almost wanted to call it like the Kalashnikov order because the thing about like a machete, because the thing is about like the Kalashnikov is a symbol of like revolution, right?
Right.
And like post-colonialism because that was the weapon that proliferated in all these countries. Of course, in the United States, we think of it as like the USSR, right? But you go
Right.
anywhere else in the world where they fought uprisings, they all use those. And in Latin
Right.
America, the machete actually does have that same connotation.
Right.
So I don't know why they call it the machete order. Probably because they just hack it out very bluntly,
It
which is
was
not
the
exactly
guy
what a
who,
good machete should do. But
yeah, the guy who created it. Like he calls his blog no machete juggling,
mm.
and so that's
Oh,
why
so
he
it's
called.
named after his blog. Okay.
Yeah, it's named after his blog. Like he
Okay.
specifically says it when he was describing it. Is like I'm calling it machete order because like
Mm.
it's like just in the case it takes off and I'm vain like that because he says it kind
Right.
of jokingly, and then like there's an update from later on where he's like, "Hey, it worked."
Okay. Well, I'm not mad at him anymore. Then
Right.
I'm just slightly disappointed because calling this that would have been so much nicer because the point of what we're doing with this is twofold. And part of it's
Yeah.
something that I didn't really understand was going on until I went on graphic policy to talk about The Mandalorian season one. So I like, there's a ton of shit I just did not know when I did that
Yeah.
episode. But I wasn't there to be a Star Wars expert. I was there to be someone who like really fucking
Right.
loved it and had stuff to say about where Star Wars was going. So like this has been going on for a while. But like the big thing about Rogue One and Solo, which I had seen and you had not,
Right.
and you hadn't seen all the cartoons yet. So as the stuff was elapsing, we didn't really know as we were watching this stuff what was going on. But the
Right.
thing that I was picking up on, because I was just doing off year and you weren't as much into the off year as me, um, is that they were starting to work, number one, they were starting to work the cartoons and the stuff that Dave Filoni had done and his team into the live action movies to integrate
Yeah.
that stuff in. And I think I kind of knew a little bit of that.
Same
But
here.
the other thing that was happening that became extremely obvious from the first trailer of Rogue One and why I got so excited for Rogue One is because they were giving us a different side to the resistance and the rebellion.
Yeah.
Which really excited me. And I think like the people who are going to understand what we're doing here the most are people who watched Game of Thrones,
Right.
which is really ironic. I can't remember. Did you watch any of that shit?
I saw the first episode of Game of Thrones with a friend. I read the first 20 pages of Song of Ice and Fire while waiting to pick up my mom's Vicodin
Yeah.
like prescription after she like twisted her ankle or something like that. It was just there on the shelf at
Right.
CVS. And then like I had vague gleanings of stuff that was going on the show because I'm that person
Right.
that needs to know what the hell people on the internet are talking about.
Same. Right. Yeah.
So like I knew like certain things, but I didn't really follow the plot that closely.
Mm-hmm.
So like yeah, I never really got into Game of Thrones,
Okay.
and probably for the best.
I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, whatever. I don't extremely regret it. I mean, I have a lot of bones to pick, but like I've read all the books.
Right.
Um, and I watched like maybe 3 seasons of the TV show and then like watched the last episode, which was fine. There's a lot of stuff I missed in the middle, but like, holy shit, is there a video out there of me very wine drunk and awful makeup, like watching it in the fucking attic? Jesus Christ. Doing the like Judas Slade's voice was perfect. We did it, lads. We fucking did it. Hey, when the fucking dragon burns down the fucking Iron Throne, we did it, lads. It is such a beautiful, fun, cathartic moment in the show.
Right.
Especially if you hate the show. To
Right.
watch the dragon melt the throne. And because like that was my prediction that like no one's gonna sit on it.
Right.
And I fucking won. The dragon fucking burned it down. But the point is that like a lot of Game of Thrones is focused on the major powers, the major families, the rich people, right? Because like
Right.
the Starks are like underdogs and they're more like aligned with the working class and stuff, where it seems to have like working class values. They're not super bougie. They're not like into incest, and like
Right.
none of them are gay or bisexual or anything. They're all extremely heterosexual. There's
Of
just like a
course.
little bit of like forced gender variance in like one of the daughters who has to pretend to be a boy to survive.
Right.
But she's not like really trans or gender fluid in a way that she embraces. She just kind of has to switch genders a lot because of like what her job becomes. So it's
Right.
kind of like it's all from the perspective of rich people, even though they like try to trick you a little bit into thinking maybe it's not because the Stark seems so salt of the earth. Um,
Right.
but the thing that really struck me that I thought was really cool when I was reading the books, and what made me like really just be able to proudly say fuck Tolkien, and like I really the huge innovation that I really appreciate. And there are probably other like fantasy authors who have done this, but George Martin, like he Germ, as I like to call him, he took the narrative out of the castles, out of like the
Right.
landed gentry, because like Lord of the Rings never does that. And this is the other, like,
Right.
it's the same bait and switch with like Frodo and Sam, because they're like hobbits and they're like cute little people who live in the country. But like Frodo is still landed gentry, homie. They're just
Right.
more country. And like I've read those critiques, right, a long time ago. So I've had that in my head for a long time. But they show you the ravages of the Civil War. They show you what the ground is like. And it's so much better in the books because like when you go through that part, there's way less like grimy exploitative violence and like rape and shit. You get
Right.
so much better of a ground view of this is what happens when there's a big fantasy civil war between the powerful people. This is what happens when like the food dries up, the peasants are starving, and you get like Beric Dondarrion, like I fucking owns, and that's a long story. But it's like this dude who's a knight who's just like, no, I'm out here to protect the people, and he's kind
Right.
of this like Marxist revolutionary sort of. He never like tries to throw over the throne, but he's just out there getting shit to people and doing cool shit. And he keeps dying and being brought back, and it sucks worse every time, but he keeps doing it because he's the only guy who's out there doing it. Fucking owns, right? And so like for big mainstream like fantasy and stuff, that's a big deal.
Right.
So like Star Wars is like the worst for the bait and switch that I'm talking about with like the Starks and
Right.
like Frodo and Sam. Because like what is it that you think you're starting this franchise with? A Twinkie farm boy,
Right.
this like rapscallion criminal and his hairy buddy, and this like exiled dispossessed princess. So
Right.
like nobody seems like they're prestigious and powerful, and they're like on the fucking run the whole time.
Right.
Like they do that whole trilogy at a dead run. Like shit sucks. Like like life sucks in The Empire Strikes Back. Like
Right.
bad. None of this is fun. None of this feels cool. No one's sitting around with like rich shit, right?
Right.
And you just kind of don't really think about it, especially like when you see this shit as a kid. You don't really think about how dynastic all of this is, and part of it is because of how narrow the scope is,
Mhm.
right? And how short the interval, and that's fine. I'm not saying that George Lucas was being a dickhead, right, and trying to pull the wool over our eyes. It's just you don't really see that too much, and then you see like the prequel trilogy, and you're like, oh, they're all like bougie as fuck. Like this is
Mhm.
where Darth Vader came from, and like the only reason Luke was like raised on a fucking farm is because his mom died and his dad went ape shit. Like he
Right.
was the heir to all of that shit from the beginning, and you kind of understand that when like Luke and Leia are twins, and you're like, oh, she got the like the city mouse, country mouse, right?
Right.
So like it was just where they chose to hide them. But you still don't really ever think of Luke as an aristocrat, and like and they super and they like intentionally start trying to hide that fact in
Right.
like the sequel trilogy when he's like milking that thing. He's like this, and he's just this angry old like fucking hermit. He's just
Right.
become like grimy Yoda. Because like I guess that's what all those motherfuckers do. Like Ben Kenobi and Yoda, they just ghost, right?
Yeah,
And
pretty
they
much.
just get bitter. They all fucking do the same thing, I guess. I don't know. But that's where you're like, okay, like you're really trying to hide what it is that Luke is and where he came from at this point.
Right.
And like but like the sequel trilogy kind of like not the sequel trilogy, the like prequel trilogy really like, you know, it tells you the lie. It's like, yeah,
Right.
no, these are all super powerful aristocrats who form the backbone of the rebellion, and
Right.
that's why you have all of these little white girls with like British accents, kind of because of, you know, if you've seen Wishful Drinking, right? Carrie Fisher just had this floating accent, but it still denotes this like sense of class and things.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's like, even like Jyn Erso, right? She's not related to Leia, but they still want to give you, she's like this kind of aristocrat. And it's so funny that like her dad is Mads Mikkelsen speaking in his natural accent. So it's like, okay. I mean, you can see how that would happen, but it's
Right.
like, because, you know, maybe she didn't grow up in the Denmark of Star Wars and like Mads did. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you don't always have the same accent as your parents, like, fair enough. But
Yeah.
it's just like Mads with his fucking, he's Danish, right? Is that what it is? He's from Denmark? Is that
I
correct?
believe so.
Yeah, but it's you know, it's Mads Mikkelsen
One of
talking
those.
like
Yeah.
Mads Mikkelsen, and she's got her proper posh accent. I rebel. Like that's the thing that like makes me want to die every time I hear that trailer. And I don't know how anybody could take that line unironically. Like no offense to like the Mary Sue followers who are like, yeah, I rebel, because I just hear this like posh person, I rebel, and I'm like, honey, they would kick the shit out of you at like St. Trinian's. Okay? And even St. Trinian's is pretty posh for a bad girls' school. They wouldn't let
Right.
you get away with that shit there.
Right.
Right? Let alone, and I was just, I rebel. Like, no. And it just, it's so funny when people get mad at like the headlines or like Rogue One put the war in Star Wars, which is true. Like, it's just true. Like, stop nitpicking
Right.
and being like, and I'm like, how are you gonna nitpick it when, like, in the movie, the girl says, "This is a rebellion. I rebel." Like, you
I think
can't. You
I think that
can't.
got cut from the final movie though.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
See, the thing is, I've only seen it once, and I was a mess by the end of it. So, like, that's quite possible. But like Mon Mothma, you know, God love Laura Dern, but it's all of a type,
Yeah.
right? It's all of a fucking type. And like Rey. They keep trying to come up with like reasons why she had that accent. No, they didn't know what the fuck they were doing with her.
Right.
And this is just a pattern of things that you do, right? I don't know. Watch Daisy Ridley in like that bonkers Australian Ophelia movie. Just please do it. You will never ever be the same again. And it's amazing. God bless Naomi Watts. Just fucking watch that movie. I was like, wow, Daisy Ridley's a real person. She's not just an action figure. I can
Right.
appreciate that now. Like, no offense, like she was fine in Star Wars, but she just felt like a Star Wars creation and not a person. Because like I had seen John Boyega in Attack of the Block. Like, I
Right.
know who and what he is, and he didn't have like a shitty stiff role. I mean, you can say what you want about like all the ways they fucked up Finn, but he didn't have a shitty like he could live in that role, and like
Right.
you know, it's just that double bind. You either get the Rey role where you're like as stiff as Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, and your story goes nowhere, and you're the star, or you're John Boyega, and you kind of get to be John Boyega, but it goes nowhere,
Right.
right? Or you know, it's the Harvey Dent speech from The Dark Knight, right? But yeah, so like you just always get that one of a type. It's always the elite from there.
Right.
And so you see, even just the cinematography of Rogue One was like, no, this is guerrilla warfare. This is who gets fucked up from. You are seeing like disabled people in Star Wars in a new way. Because
Right.
like Darth Vader is disabled. Like that's functionally true.
Yeah. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
But like, is anybody claiming Darth Vader? Maybe Dan Crenshaw does. I don't know.
Oh.
Shit, now he's gonna get on Saturday Night Live again. Fuck.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not like representation, right? But when you see like Forrest Whitaker's character and some of these characters and like what they have to do to be mobile and stuff, you know, because like disability in Star Wars, as far as I can remember it, and like we're not the best equipped people to talk about this, but it is a point to be made, is like General Grievous, Darth Vader, and we'll get to Darth Maul in a bit because he does perpetuate this a little bit when he becomes like the Toy Story.
Thankfully, that's only one episode.
but it's tied to like being evil and like using the bad force, like the dark side, like
Right.
corrupts your body. Like General Grievous is just, oh man, I'm not gonna get into any of that. I was so excited for him going into that movie, and I was like, what the fuck? I also thought Darth Vader was actually going to be in that movie for fuck knows what reason. So I just left that movie like, sure, the opening 5 minutes were fucking awesome, but the rest, who knows? Who knows? So anyway, but like you open it up, like you see things like that, right? And there's a blind character, right? And there's all of this, the way the disability is framed, and the way that war is framed, and the way that resistance is framed, and who really, like, it's so funny because there's not like a single Bothan
Right.
in Rogue One. And like, I know that that's such a throwaway line, but like, there are actual novels in the Star Wars like extended universe where like you see the Bothans and like there's
Right.
people that know them and like the Rogue Squadron gets involved. So I've always had like a knowledge of like the Bothan involvement in like getting the Death Star plans.
Right.
So like I'm just watching this movie and I'm like, wait a minute. It's not like it took anything away from the movie, but it's just there's this stupid knowledge hovering in the back of my head watching it. Like they really fucked A New Hope because there's not a single Bothan in this movie. You just turned like, was it Admiral Akbar? I don't know who it was that said it, but
It
turned
was
that guy into an asshole.
oh, God, I think it was one of the generals. I don't remember the
Yeah.
name now, but I know what you're talking about.
But yeah, and so, but you know, it's so much better that they were like, you know what, we're just gonna, that throwaway line is a throwaway line. We're not
Yeah.
gonna worry about that. But it gave you a different idea of who was in the rebellion and who did it and
Yeah.
all that shit. And it's like they really should have marketed Solo a better. I mean, maybe they shouldn't have because like what I saw in it is not
Mhm.
like wouldn't have added $10 million to the box office.
Right.
And you probably wouldn't have even watched Solo if I hadn't been like, actually watch Solo for the like last 5 minutes of the fucking movie. But it's worth it.
Yeah,
It's like, you gotta see Empress Nest. You gotta see this bitch. And I'm like, I can't tell you who she is. I can't tell you why you need to see Empress Nest, but you do. And you're just watching this movie. Like, it's okay. I had a lot of fun with it. I was like, fuck you, Joss Whedon, right? Like, it's that
right.
same thing. Because the Solo is just them like stealing the train job back from Joss Whedon.
Pretty much.
That's the entire fucking movie, right? They're just like,
Yeah.
fuck Firefly, and it's like weirdo Confederate, like neo-Confederate fantasy, and it's Chinese swear words.
Right.
Oh my god, I was just, because I kind of saw from the trail when the thing with the stuff in it is going over, I was like, oh, it seems a little bit like Firefly. And then I was like, oh yeah, Malcolm Reynolds is just like plagiarized from Han Solo. It's fine. You can steal anything you want from Joss Whedon because he stole it from somebody else first. So they just stole Firefly back from Joss Whedon. And like maybe that's the real way that you get someone to watch the movie.
Right.
So, like I watched it because I was like, okay, it's here. And like I wanted to see what the fuck was gonna happen with like Donald Glover playing Lando, and like it's worth it, and like the Wookiee Rebellion owns, so it's a fine movie. But I was just like, that was when I was like, oh wow, the Rogue One stuff is like actually going somewhere,
Right.
right? It's not a one-off. And I was like, ooh, like we could be moving this forward. And then I was like, who the fuck is watching Solo? Like, where is this gonna go from here? Is it gonna go anywhere from here, right? And we'll get into this again later, but like when it gets to the after. Like the Trixie and Katya when they're doing like the dating profile for the straight producer. The Green Mile, the Green Mile, Darth Maul, Darth Maul. Because I think I kind of had it semi-spoiled, like where someone said something vague, and I kind of understood that they meant that like Darth Maul was going to show up in Solo, but it left my mind by the time we got to the end of the movie, and I was like, what the fuck Because I don't watch the cartoons. So then people were telling me afterwards, they're like, Darth Maul, he came back in the cartoons. And I was like, aren't they like 100 years apart? And I was like, oh no, Luke is born at the end of. And I was like, oh. I was like, what? So then that's when I started in my head. I was like, so stuff from the cartoons is in the movies, and there's like this like wild new version of the rebellion showing up, and like that's in Solo too.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, Solo is actually like conceptually extremely exciting, even though it's like not a great movie.
Right.
And there are so many like stupid, needless swerves into like the movie continuity where they like talk out the Kessel Run record, like they talk it out.
Yeah.
And the whole like becoming the AI of the Millennium Falcon, that thing, I was like, I don't know, I don't fucking understand.
That one was like,
actually, sorry, we should have like
we
talked
really
about Solo when we get to Solo. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's the point of why we're doing this. So we still don't have a name for this order. I almost want to call it like the Darth Maul saga. And that'll become clear later. I almost want to call it that because it kind of is. But I don't know. We don't have an order for this. But talk me through an order from the beginning.
Okay. So I would put. Well, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could do it chronologically in terms of like when it established in the Star Wars universe.
That's kind of what I want to do to clarify things. Yeah.
Right. So the order and chronologically starts with Clone Wars, because that takes place during the Clone Wars, during the prequels. Then goes Solo.
So who does Clone Wars track? Who's important?
Okay,
to being
so Clone
integrated.
Wars...
Like who are the key characters who are either directly or indirectly integrated into the live action movies and stuff like The Mandalorian later?
Okay. So Clone Wars is interesting because like kind of plays out more like dispatches from the war versus like having like you have like main characters that they follow in a lot of episodes, but then there'll be times where like they'll focus on, this particular clone for a bit, or they'll random Jedi that they have an arc with along with the rest of the characters. But I would say you're kind of your main.
That's actually extremely helpful because I've been confused about so many points that you've brought up in casual conversation with the Clone Wars. I'm like, what is the fucking arc of this show? Because you also look at like the voice cast list, and you're like, there are a million fucking characters. So it's a bit closer to an anthology show.
Yes. Now there are kind of like arcs that happen in it, and like the last. So the last 5 episodes are one giant arc that kind of are the parallel of what's going on with Ahsoka when Revenge of the Sith is happening. So, but yeah, I think it's just I won't say it's all over the place, but yeah, it's very much kind of like an anthology series, and there will be episodes that carry over for there'll be arcs that carry over from multiple episodes. There'll be arcs that are brought up and then come back later, but like ultimately it doesn't even air, like the episodes themselves are not in chronological order of when they happen in the terms of when they happen in the war.
Okay.
So there are lists out there, like if you want to go watch it chronologically, just watch it in this order, but you can watch it in the order that they were aired and it's fine too. So
here you go. Eat shit again, Joe Sweden. There's another Firefly joke for you.
Yeah. But yeah, so Clone Wars, I would say your more important characters that come out of that are, you have Ahsoka, of course. Rumored
she hasn't really popped up anywhere yet, has she?
Not yet. She's rumored to be in season 2 of The Mandalorian, but obviously we don't really know shit about season 2 of The Mandalorian besides it's happening. We don't even,
which is good.
Yeah.
Which is good. Yeah. I love it. I want to know as little as possible. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, like, they fucking hid the baby. Nobody knew that the baby was happening until that fucking episode aired. Because I saw the first episode before you, right?
No, I saw it because I was like, you need to see it.
That's right.
Because I saw the baby and I was like, you to see this.
Right. I knew one of us did it to the other. I don't know why I
Yeah.
thought I said that to you, but
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Because I knew you need to see it, because as soon as I saw the baby, I was just like,
You
Emma
understood the
needs to
lone
see
wolf
this
and cub.
because
Yeah.
Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yeah, yeah. I just because like I was like, is this baby gonna be like in one episode or like what? So I was like, am I jumping too far or not? No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't.
Yeah. But yeah, so kind of your most important characters that come up in Clone Wars that carry over, besides, Kenobi and Skywalker and Padme and all that, fun stuff. Let's say Ahsoka, the clones, specifically Commander Rex. Trying to think who else popped. I mean, Maul, obviously.
Yeah, I was waiting. Your boy.
Yeah.
I love that we're gonna keep talking about Darth Maul. Like who? Because I didn't know that he came back until I saw Solo, and you read no superhero comics and you just like know people come back. So it's
Right.
not like the hugest shock, but I was like, what the fuck? They brought Maul back? So
Right.
you're kind of like, sure, people come back, but I'm like, Darth Maul? And then
Right.
now I'm like, I'm on the Maul train because it's so fucking bizarre. Because, like, I mean, not gonna lie, like 1999 or 2000, 1999, I was like, Darth Maul fucking owns. This guy is awesome. I have, like, a Darth Maul mug. You can't drink out
Right.
of it because like,
Right. That's face.
it's a mug with a handle, so I don't know, you put pencils in it or something. But, like, yeah,
Right.
I do.
But yeah. Okay. So I would say those are kind of going to be your three most important characters. I mean, you have Luminara Unduli comes up, like she's mentioned later in Rebels. Um, it's also been like a couple months since I watched Rebels, so I'm trying to remember who else was important that carried over. But I would say those are kind of like your three most important characters going kind of forward. And also, like, I would say the Kryze family and the Mandalorians, because those come up again in Rebels, with Sabine and Darksaber and all of that, and obviously that's gonna carry over to the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
So
We'll
because yeah, their first instance is Satine and her sister Bo-Katan and Death Watch. So I would say those are the entities that you would be the most important in this case. And then obviously end of the Clone Wars happens. Order 66 is executed, so then you move on to Solo.
That's killing all the Jedi.
Right. And so not all the Jedi perish, but it's either they're dead or they are on the run.
Yeah.
And then after,
I remember that moment in that movie. I was like, fuck.
Yeah, it still sucks. Like watching it's just like, oh, this hurts.
Yeah, and I'm sure that when it hits, and I know this for a fact, I haven't watched it. I know this for a fact that when it hits in Clone Wars, it hits way harder, for obvious reasons. But like, I'm always scarred by the fact that like pretty much the first Jedi you see die is like a Twi'lek woman. I'm like, you sons of bitches, my girls.
Yeah, that was what was her name? Like, cause she has a voice cameo in fucking Rise of Skywalker, and I can't remember what her name is right now. Ayla Secura, that's it.
Yeah.
So next chronologically is Solo, which is already kind of deep into the Empire and all that fun stuff, and you have the beginning of the rebellion with the Cloud Riders, and then.
So, my favorite. Dumb, like just wrong Star Wars fan theory, and I love this more than like the like lineal Darksaber like Harry Potter thing, and we'll let you rant about that later because I think that's what happens. When I was like, oh, this is what happens in Harry Potter, so this is how lightsabers work. No, it's not. But like my favorite to me, like the worst conspiracy theory, or like fan theory of all time, and you find this like if you Google Enfys Nest, the first result in the autocomplete that comes up is Enfys Nest Mon Mothma. It's like, no,
they're not even the same race.
That's the big problem. I don't like the ages don't matter. Enfys Nest being Mon Mothma is like, yeah, this little. I don't really know the actress's background. She's probably mixed race, but anyway, she's clearly not Mon Mothma. But the whole thing is like because the whole thing is it's the seed money to start the rebellion, a rebellion, right? And
Right.
so the fundamental problem with the fans who like pick up on that thing is that they're thinking that there's like one coordinated rebellion still, which
Right.
like if you actually watched Rogue One, at this point you should understand that that's not what happened,
Right.
right? That there were that that these people were effectively kind of being used opportunistically by the bougie people when it was good for them or convenient for them, right? And that was the whole problem with, they're like, oh, like Forrest Whitaker's character, oh, he's too brutal, he's too this or he's too that, and it's kind of like, do you not see what it is that the Empire does, right? So it's this very like nice, clean, kind of trying to maintain continuity with the old Republic, right? They're trying to rebuild the old Republic. Is who Mon Mothma, Princess Leia, all these people are, right? So, and like, I don't think those characters had like great lives under the old Republic, right? Do you know what I mean? And so
Right.
you're starting to like see those things start to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, of course, like later on with Werner Herzog, where he's like, do things seem better to you now? And he's like trying to exploit the collapse of the Empire to be like, maybe you should have left us in power. And it's like, no, we shouldn't have.
Right.
But that's the whole thing, right? And that's why it's so bizarre that people would be like, yeah, like Empress Nest and Mon Mothma are the same person. Like, you clearly don't understand what the purpose of Empress Nest is. Which,
Right.
like, and we know very much, like, what certain subsets of the Star Wars fandom are like now. Just go into John Boyega's mentions on any given Sunday, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's not super surprising that this is flying way over people's heads. But that's also because like they really wanted to sell you Darth Vader action figures for a long time, and like people just kind of accepted Star Wars as like a fun, empty aesthetic thing, like GI Joe or whatever. That you can buy both sides, and you can like join the 501st and like go to baseball games as stormtroopers, and you're not really dressing
Right.
up as a Nazi, because like they framed the franchise in a way that they wanted you to be okay to dress up as a stormtrooper. It's not like they were real Nazis. So,
Right.
like, the kind of tension that exists with Hydra now, like, post MCU, because, like, the discontinuity was, like, stitched back together by Winter Soldier and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that kind of,
Right.
like, people being like, please don't dress up as Hydra, that stuff doesn't apply to Star Wars, like, and it never will, because there was just too long and too powerful like this is an aesthetic thing, right?
Right.
For even though you have characters like Werner Herzog's character who finally makes you feel like this guy is like a Nazi hiding in Buenos Aires, like that's
Yeah.
what he is. That's and even though they restored a bit of that, you're never going to have that same moral tension. So you're always going to have these weird, jangly, like popular fan ideas that could think something like Enfys Nest and Mon Mothma are the same person, even though it's like, no, there's a fundamental split in the way we're discussing the rebellion now.
Right.
And then, of course, the other part of that, of Solo, is Darth Maul. But it's just, to me, it's also like, why the fuck was Darth Maul in Solo? Because, like, sure, now I know that he came back in the cartoons. But, like, typically, if you have an after credit, Star Wars doesn't really do after credits. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that until Solo. But usually when you do that, like Sam Jackson in Iron Man,
Right.
the twins in Captain America Winter Soldier, Thor at the end of Iron Man 2, it's to set something up. And it's like, what plans do they have for Darth Maul?
Right.
Right? Like, what are they going to do? And I really hope that he's in The Mandalorian season 2.
I mean, he's dead, so like.
He was, honey, they cut him in half once.
True.
It's going to be Futurama. It's going to be
Just, just a head.
All
Just
of this,
a head
here's
that they
the
found
thing,
somewhere
like,
on Tatooine.
all of this like teasing Boba Fett in The Mandalorian is a fucking lie. It's Darth Maul. He's going to take the helmet off and it's going to be Darth Maul. The other thing that could happen is that it is Boba Fett, and like you think you're going to get this like huge intergenerational showdown, like Hulk Hogan versus John Cena, right?
Mhm.
But like you're not. Like they're going to square up, and then I can't remember because this happens in fiction a lot, and I can't remember an example. But like somebody else with an older beef shows up and is like, no, he's mine, right? I think Princess Bride does that, doesn't it? With like Wesley's gonna fight the bad guy, and then like the Spanish dude is like, no, my name is Inigo Montoya. You know?
Right. 'Cause
So
Inigo had the beef with the six-fingered man, so like, yeah,
yeah,
kind of, yeah,
exactly.
kind of.
So like Darth Maul is gonna do that. But the problem is that Darth Maul is the asshole in this situation because he's always the asshole. And so
Right.
he's like he has a running beef with like Boba Fett. Because like if you look at the meta franchise, like Darth Maul stole Boba Fett's spot. He single white femaled Boba Fett. Boba Fett was like this mysterious anti-hero villain that we didn't know much about, but he got all the merch and he was super cool and everybody loved him and he got the hoodies and stuff. And some people are like Boba Fett is like overrated. Other people are like no. And then like you think he's dead. Like he dies. He goes in the Sarlacc pit. And there's all these novels about how he survived in the Sarlacc pit and how he got out and he lived this other life. And then Darth Maul shows up after those books were written, after all of that happened in the EU. He falls down a pit. Wow. Wow. You know, with the added bonus of being cut in half, but it's like, oh, so you're the mysterious villain who shows up out of nowhere and then just gets, you know, thrown in a fucking hole. And then he comes back from the hole looking like the baby head, spider monster from Toy Story. So like he's just sitting there stealing this man's entire life out from under him. And what more can he do to him? So there has to be like a Darth Maul Boba Fett beef in the Mandalorian season 2. And it's all set up by Solo because Maul can never beef with Solo. I mean, maybe he can if they do Solo 2, right? Which how do you call a movie Solo 2? I guess there's like a dozen Final Fantasy games,
Yeah.
so I guess you can, but they're gonna call it Duo. Because Chewie's there now. But like, so where do we go after Solo?
Okay, so after Solo, you have Rebels, which takes
Mhm.
place from like it roughly starts about 5 years before before A New Hope, and then finishes about a year before Rogue One. So that follows specifically like you have some characters from Clone Wars that do pop up, like Ahsoka, but mostly that follows this one specific kind of group within the rebellion and kind of follows them as the rebellion kind of starts to grow and become more connected. And that includes Sabine, and there's also a whole arc about trying to get Mandalore out of Empire control.
And
And
does Forrest Whitaker's character in Rogue One appear in Rebels?
so he actually shows up for the first time in the Clone Wars as
Okay,
like his
okay,
younger version and his sister Stila. And then he shows up
okay. Because I wanted
again.
to ask that, but I
Yeah,
thought it was Rebels, so I didn't ask in Clone Wars. Sorry.
he does, but his character is mostly in Rebels. Like
Okay.
he doesn't show up a whole lot. I think he only shows up in about 3 or 4 episodes in Rebels. But yeah, he does show up in Rebels. Something happens between the last time he shows up in Rebels and when he shows up in Rogue One because he's not disabled yet in Rebels.
Yeah.
So
A
something
long
happens.
war is what happened. A long fucking war. But
Yeah.
so he's kind of like the key point, the key character where we can say these two things are connected, right?
Mhm.
That the integration of the cartoons into the live action and the expansion of the scope and scale and nature of resistance to the Empire. These two are fundamentally inextricably linked, and they're going to be continuing so because we believe, although I guess we don't know for sure, that Sabine Wren is going to be in The Mandalorian.
It's rumored. Again, a
We'll
lot
get
of
into
like
that in a later segment.
yeah,
Because
it's
that's her,
rumored.
right, that I'm thinking of, right?
Yes, Sabine,
Yeah.
and then it's also rumored that Kay Sackhoff's coming back to play Bo-Katan because she
Wow.
voiced Bo-Katan in the animated series.
Yeah,
So
Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica. Yeah.
yeah, that's her.
That'd be hilarious if she showed up like in person in Star Wars.
Right. They might just go with the whole putting the helmet on her because Bo-Katan's a Mandalorian, so that makes sense.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
So, but I don't know. Again, all of this is still kind of rumored. Like, there's not even like all of these like casting announcements came from like didn't
Yeah.
come from Disney directly.
Yeah.
So it was just sort of like our sources tell us that
We're still in the Meltzer zone.
yeah, high Meltzer zone right now. um,
Is there any other key characters from Rebels who show up elsewhere, or who have shown up elsewhere?
um, so far, no. A lot of characters that were in Rebels are rumored to be in season 2 of The Mandalorian, but which obviously by the fact that the Darksaber shows up, it's probably going to happen. But yeah, so far none of the other characters from Rebels have shown up elsewhere. Now there are like
But
visual.
but just conceptually speaking, if you like The Mandalorian, if you like Rogue One, you like this different side of the galaxy, then you should be watching Rebels for more than just continuity purposes.
Yes, Rebels is probably out of like the sort of the 3 like animated shows that are out so far, which is Clone Wars, Rebels, and Star Wars Resistance, which takes place during the sequel trilogy. Rebels is my favorite. So, because I think it has the more tighter core story and the more tighter cast. Not that I say I love Clone Wars, don't get me wrong, but Rebels is my personal favorite.
Okay. And where do we go after Rebels?
So after Rebels finishes is when you get into Rogue One.
Okay.
And so that sort of Rogue One. That's why I said that like I feel Rebels leads into like A New Hope and all of that, but I feel like it's a better companion piece to Rogue One.
Yeah,
just
particularly because the one character, his arc gets wrapped up in Rogue One.
Yeah, and then like there's like brief background cameos from you see Chopper, right, who's the astromech from Rebels, and like hanging out in the background.
He's kind of the Bender of Star Wars.
A little, yeah. He doesn't like talk, but like no. he basically got a big attitude. Vibe of like he gets described as a cat, basically. Like you can tell him to do stuff, he might do it, but maybe not in the way you want. But yeah, some people, like some characters, not characters, but like Chopper has a background cameo, and then you're like you can see the Ghost a couple of times, which is the main ship of the characters in Rebels.
Right, and that's a thing where it's like, did the cast of the Ghost die? Because there were no survivors except for Princess Leia. So there was kind of people who kind of knew what the Ghost was, or like when you were watching Rebels, because you didn't watch Rebels until long after Rogue One, right? And then and then you rewatched Rogue One and was like, oh fuck, I don't want to see that ship here.
Well, yeah, no, because like I know for a fact, because there's an epilogue at the end of Rebels where they explain what happened to the characters. Yeah. And none of the characters died during the Battle of Yavin, so we're good there. I'm sure some people they interacted with died, but because it's canonical that Hera, well, one character in Rebels does die, but he dies way before that. But Hera, it's canonical that Hera does make it to the end of the war, and she fights at the Battle of Endor. But
is there anything about Rogue One itself that we missed? Because we have talked a lot about Rogue One, and I think anybody's gonna be pretty familiar about it.
Not that I can really think of, like, because the ties to Rebels are mostly with some of those visuals and some of the themes, but other than that, if you not really else you can cover there.
Quick shout out to Ben Mendelsohn.
Yeah.
Because it starts with him, right, and it ends with Werner Herzog in terms of like really taking it to the next level to
Right.
show us those guys, right? And I think one of the reasons why I was like, no, we don't need to get into the core trilogy, even to like do anything with Rogue One, is
Mhm.
that the literal ground level view of what happens when the Death Star goes off
Uh-huh.
moots A New Hope.
Right.
Right. Because like even with like the 97 cut, like the special edition,
Hmm.
it's still just boom.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the point of Rogue One, because that's the hilarity, that scene encapsulates everything that we're talking about in this order in
Right.
one scene, is that you're used to the planet exploding at a distance
Right.
and not seeing the scope and scale and horror of all that death. It's just boom,
Yeah.
shiny light show and done. And like, yeah, in 1977, what the fuck were they going to do? So we're not fighting anybody on that. But the ability to have the technology and the means and the nuance to show Mendelsohn there, like, wow, look how pretty this is from a distance, is kind of also speaking to like the aesthetics of watching things blow up in action movies.
Right.
And then you go down there and you just see boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Like that's this entire order. That's this entire conversation
Right.
in like a minute or however long that sequence is, right?
Mhm.
So that's why, and I mean, I didn't tie it to that exact scene until just the second, but like, that's why I say that like Rogue One is the epicenter that this whole motif spreads out from.
Right.
Because Rogue One is where it started in terms of like production terms, when they started doing this, right?
Right.
Even though it sits like kind of smack in the middle of the chronology
Right.
of all of this, because of how atemporal the production of all of this is.
Mhm.
But like everything goes out from there, because there were new things that were made that took
Right.
place before it, like Solo,
Right.
and things that take place after it, like The Mandalorian,
Right.
that it set the stage for.
Right.
So like even the MCU has never done that, because they've never done such a weird backwards forwards
Yeah.
thing. It's all been kind of, well, we did this and that one, now we have to deal with it,
Right.
right? They're not building back.
Yeah. I know that Krennic does briefly get mentioned in Rebels. Like he doesn't show up as a character, but like he does briefly get mentioned, and the implication is that basically everybody else who works with him fucking hates him. So basically what we see in
Which is like everybody in the Empire. I mean, like, I get it. I do
Right.
understand that it set the stage for someone who's especially unlikable.
Right.
But it's just like, because this is one of the things that like the Imperials always captured so well about the Nazis, that I didn't understand about the Nazis until I read more into them. Is like Hitler always intentionally kept them in tension, competing against each other, so that
Right.
they could never fight him. And George
Right.
Lucas has always, and the people who actually wrote the movie, so I think George Lucas might have written A New Hope, and like somebody else like actually wrote the screenplays, because he wrote the story Bible. He came
Right.
up with the characters, but in terms of the individual scripts. But something with these little dynamics, like especially the whole part with like the first time Vader does the Force choke and all of this, and the fact that Vader sits outside of the regular chain of command.
Right.
He just like, does he have an official rank? Not really, that I know of. Nobody ever, like, he's just Darth Vader. And you
Yeah.
kind of don't understand that. Like, when I was a kid, I kind of thought that Darth was some kind of like a military rank or something. It's like, no, this is a weird religious sect that operates independently of the chain of command of this military dictatorship. And you only understand that in the prequels, right? Or if you read deep into the extended stuff. So like that was kind of a fuck up on their part, but still the point of it, the ways that the officers were always fighting each other and
Right.
always seemed to not know what each other was doing, is very true to how the Third Reich worked.
Right.
Now that I know this. So like even the extended universe, and like when guys like Thrawn show up, are very, very, very good at that. So
Right.
I know what you mean in terms of like they set the stage from being exceptionally unlikable, but like the fact is that the Empire was always like backbiting chaos.
Right.
And that's like the one true great thing that people, that like writers like Dave Filoni, and the people who did Rogue One, and the people and the other writers on Mandalorian, they could seize on that thread, and the actors like Mendelsohn and even Mads Mikkelsen, really, even though he wasn't like a villain, but he was still kind of, you could see where he was in all of this,
Mhm.
right? And you could understand him as like one of these like German scientists who was pushed into the rocket program and stuff like
Yeah,
this, right?
he was the Werner von Braun of the Empire in that
Yeah,
case.
but wasn't von Braun like an actual Nazi though? Or do I
Yeah,
not understand him correctly?
yeah.
My understanding with von Braun was that he was a Nazi. Like he was like a party man. Whereas like Mads Mikkelsen was not,
Oh no,
right? Do you know what I
obviously.
mean? So he was in terms of his impact, but like he was not in terms of his ideology and his
Right,
bearing, right?
right.
But so you get Mads Mikkelsen, you get Ben Mendelsohn. It's great that like two of them are European and like one is just like an Australian. Um, and Werner Herzog, right, to really bring that out, and it was present dormant in the franchise,
Mhm.
right? That you don't get in like the whatever the fuck they're called in the sequel trilogy, where they kind of seem like the villains in like a British sitcom, which is like fine. If you want like a Mitchell and Webb skit to be Star Wars, then like sure, Hux is great. And like that's who loves Hux and those guys. People are like, yes, let's go Faulty Towers on Star Wars. Like it's fine. It's fine. I have no argument against it. It's just not my vibe. And that's
Right,
why I'm Rogue One and not TLJ, right? Like it's
right.
fine. You like the dumb casino sequence. I was fucking like, what am I doing? I was like, the only reason I'm not skipping forward right now is that John Boyega is actually on the screen, right? And the girl who plays Rose Tico, I'm like, this is my only chance to see these actors, so I'm just gonna let it play out. But yeah, I mean, it's what you like. But
Right.
where do we go after Rogue One?
After Rogue One, obviously, you kind of there's not really anything else that takes place within the
No,
the original trilogy,
no.
so you go right into the Mandalorian.
So the thing is, this is what's too bad. Actually, no, we'll circle back to that.
Mhm.
So we get to the Mandalorian. Okay, we get to the Mandalorian. Yeah. So okay. So who were there cartoon characters who showed up in season one of the Mandalorian,
Not
or
that
was
I
it
can.
just like the production staff of the cartoons who showed up with cameos?
Yeah, it's like so basically the only thing so far that's been involved with the only two things actually
Hmm.
that have been involved so far between the animated TV shows and The Mandalorian are the Darksaber and Dave Filoni.
Okay. So it's
So
it's so this squares the circle then in the sense that like with Rogue One, it's like okay, so you have a Rebels character and a Clone
right,
Wars character who gets inserted in, and he is one of the prime vehicles for expanding what we see of the Resistance, right?
right,
But then in The Mandalorian, we see one of the key movers and shakers behind those cartoons take a writing and directing role on The
right,
Mandalorian and essentially do a live action Star Wars cartoon,
right.
right? Okay.
Yeah. So now there is like forgot one thing is there is a brief like so the scene where like Din is flashing back to when he was rescued.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's an emblem on the crest of the on the shoulder of the Mandalorian that rescues
Yeah.
him, and it's Death Watch. It's literally the symbol of Death Watch, which is the Splinter Cell group that insisted that the Kree's family, or specifically Satine Kree, should not be in power, and that the Mandalorian should continue to be a warrior race. But I don't know what their involvement is, like what their exactly their intentions or what they're planning on doing. That's all stuff that we're probably going to see in season 2. But yeah, so basically, so far the only stuff that's really been that's carried over so far are these little things, and not any sort of big plots yet.
Okay. Season two
So
could be different. So, like, was I can't remember. Was Dave Filoni himself one of the X-wing pilots?
yes, and then the prisoner episode, it's Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, and Rick. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I feel terrible. It's like Rick from Famuyiwa. I apologize. I don't.
I think
I'm
it's
not certain how to
Famuyiwa.
pronounce. Yeah,
Famuyiwa.
I believe so. Yeah.
But Rick and Deborah, they both worked on Mandalorian, but they worked on the cartoons as well.
No, they did
Okay.
not.
So
Favreau
Filoni
had,
was the only cameo who actually worked on the cartoons.
yeah. Now Favreau had a voice part in Clone Wars,
Well,
and
so did Clancy Brown, right?
I believe so.
I think you'd have to assume so because the dude's fucking everywhere.
Right. But yeah, so yeah, John Favreau had a cameo. Well, not cameo. He like previously showed up
In
in multiple
ongoing roles,
episodes.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think that was the first time him and Filoni might have met. I'm not certain, but
On Clone Wars.
yeah.
Yeah, and that was the amazing thing going back through, and I had forgotten about that when The Mandalorian started. So it's kind of like, it's amazing how Favreau was one of the key architects of the MCU when it was still at Paramount.
Hmm.
And then now, because he left after Iron Man 2, which was Disney, I
Right.
think. I think that was Disney.
I believe so. Yeah.
And he left. He did Cowboys vs. Aliens, and everyone's like, "Wow, that was you could have done Thor. You could have done Iron Man 3. You didn't." And then he comes looping back around to Disney with I think he may have done something before this, but it was kind of like The Jungle Book was one of the big ones
Yeah,
when
it was the Jungle Book.
he came back to Disney and The Lion King. But it's like that entire time, and I think this was actually between the first Iron Man and and Iron Man 2 that he started doing that when he had that voice role on Clone Wars. So he starts working with Filoni then. He's never really part of the Marvel Disney thing. Like he may have been part of the Cabal. I can't remember. Like that infamous group that they were like, this is how we're doing the movies that they feuded with Joss Whedon. I think Bendis was in there at one point.
I don't know if you know.
But it's so funny because there was this Illuminati of comics and film people along with Kevin Feige, and Whedon was feuding like hell with them, and so it's just kind of like a let them fight situation because who knows who the asshole was there?
Right.
Everyone probably. So I don't know if Jon Favreau was ever in that, but it's now you can imagine these all hands on deck Disney meetings where the heads of each department come in and Jon Favreau shows up with Dave Filoni on the Star Wars side. They're like, what up, bitches? And the Russos are just like, fuck.
Yeah.
Fuck. Right?
Yeah.
Jon Favreau leads the most blessed existence in Hollywood. Say what you want about Scarlett Johansson, but the fact is she's a huge movie star, and he just kind of moved with her from because as she was doing all of that shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the Jungle Book, but in the meantime, he does this food truck movie, and he just takes Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson with him to just make a food truck movie because he can just do that, right?
Yeah.
He's nah, that was after Cowboys versus Aliens, and I think after Iron Man 2 as well, because Scarlett Johansson is in Chef, yeah, she was, so he can just do shit like that, and then he directs The Lion King, and he's just casually working with Beyonce. And he can have a cooking show on Netflix where he talks to Gwyneth Paltrow, and he's like, hey, remember when we did Spider-Man? She's like, I haven't been in any Spider-Man movies. He's like, yeah, we were on Spider-Man. She's like, no. She's like, I would remember I was on Spider-Man. And it seems so funny because obviously she was in Homecoming. But you have to remember that Gwyneth Paltrow's view of the MCU is being flown into 20 different sets for a week each. Because she had 10 minutes in Avengers?
Yeah, that's yeah,
right?
Pretty much.
There's this segment where you're we're in a completely different movie. What the fuck? I want to know if Joss Whedon actually directed that sequence with Phil Coulson, with Clark Gregg, Robert Downey Jr., and Gwyneth Paltrow. Was Joss Whedon even on set? We're gonna find out that Zack Snyder directed that. Right? and then that's why that Joss Whedon's fuck you, I'm gonna come in and fuck up your movie, right? Which is the most terrible circumstances to come in and sabotage somebody's project ever,
right?
But so she just who knows, right? Because she's been in so many of these movies in tiny cameos, so of course she doesn't remember doing Spider-Man specifically. It's just another green box for her to sit in for 8 hours and get paid a couple million and go back to Goop.
Yeah.
So of course she doesn't remember shooting Spider-Man. So all these Marvel fans how can you not remember doing Spider-Man? I was please think about the Gwyneth Paltrow view of the MCU, which is my favorite thing to think about the MCU now. I'm just what is the Gwyneth Paltrow view of all of this? Because it's the perfect perspective to see all of this through. Right? Next we're gonna do the Gwyneth Paltrow cut of the MCU. That's what we're gonna do after this.
Yeah.
Just the movies that Pepper's in, and we're only going to discuss Pepper's scenes. So like Iron Man 2 is finally going to get its fucking due, bitches.
Right.
Fuck you, it's a great movie. And then he just comes and he does the Mandalorian and just takes over Star Wars. He's like, "What up, bitches?" So now like Jon Favreau not only has moved through like almost all of Disney. I can't remember what the big franchise he hasn't done for them, like the big like acquisition one he hasn't done for them yet. But he's kind of moved through almost all of it. And he's just had like, maybe he had to do Cowboys versus Aliens and like have a big flop so that everything he does next is just like hit.
Yeah.
But it's just like, and now not only has he moved into Star Wars, but like, how do people feel about J.J. Abrams as Star Wars fans, and how do they feel about Jon Favreau as Star Wars fans? This is a man who now whose legacy is assured to beat out J.J. Abrams, who had like huge pioneering TV shows, then did Mission Impossible, then did Star Trek, then it's Star Wars, and is a fucking pariah to nerds around the world because of all of that.
Oh my God.
The like the pre-Christopher McQuarrie like Mission Impossible era is crazy because it's like Brian De Palma or someone did the first one. John Woo does the second one. J.J. Abrams does the third one with Philip Seymour Hoffman. That's the villain. Brad Bird from Pixar does Mission Impossible 4, and then I think 5 is when Christopher McQuarrie is like, just fuck off. Like we're a real franchise now.
You're right. No, that's correct. That's all correct.
But yeah, Jesus Christ, Jon Favreau, and then that ends like the chronology.
Yeah.
So